You make the right point that what Biden's saying is, I won't negotiate around the settlement that Ukraine has to accept without them. That doesn't mean we don't have things to talk to the Russians about. It just means Biden's not going to sit there and say, well, maybe you can keep this part of Ukraine and not that part of Ukraine. That's not going to happen. But to your point, if you don't create any space for kind of debate in the center here around this policy, you know where all the concerns about the war are going to go. They're going to go to where Kevin McCarthy took it, right?
Totally.
Which is like, hey, I'm getting uncomfortable here. There's nuclear threats. Let's cut off the Ukrainians, right?
It's a lot of money.
So, to some of you, like some of the Ukraine stands on Twitter or whatever who like just, pile on this stuff, you might be creating the outcome you don't want, because by punishing anybody who says, let's have diplomacy, the only alternative to your position, is where Kevin McCarthy's going, which is like, hey, let's cut these, where Tucker Carlson is.
Those were the hosts of the popular liberal podcast, Pod Save America, talking in response to the Congressional Progressive Caucus's withdrawal of a letter calling for the Biden administration to take a different approach on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. To be clear, that different approach didn't actually ask for even a cent of funds to be withdrawn. All it said was that the aim abstractly in the ether should be toward negotiations as opposed to fighting the war to the last Russian, as the State Department has implied is the ultimate plan. And here's what's so fascinating. Pod Save America is hardly known as some kind of progressive vanguard. I mean, they describe themselves as progressives in the way that liberals call themselves progressives.
The most establishment vanguard of all time.
Yes. These are former Obama speechwriters who have now become podcast moguls and who fortunately, really set the tone for what a lot of liberals think about what's going on in politics. And if they are even acknowledging the risks of attacking progressives the way the establishment attacked progressives and beat them down from their very modest letter this week, then it seems like there's a real problem here.
Yeah, what that guy was saying, and I don't know what their names are, which one he is, but one of them has the same name as the Marvel producer.
Yeah,
Favreau.
That's the best one, Jon Favreau.
Yeah. Yes, that was not him.
No.
But he was making great points, which are that, this is what I was saying in our earlier segment, the anti-war faction, just of political life, of politically active people who do not think this should go on forever without any input from us to try to end it, that faction is increasingly going to be just within the Republican Party. And that is a really interesting phenomenon. That was not the case with opposition to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Those are Obama alums. Obama came to power to end those conflicts. That is why that's why he prevailed over Hillary Clinton, because she was much more associated with the votes to authorize those wars and with intellectual and philosophical backing of those
Henry
efforts.
Kissinger is my friend.
Right.
Hillary Clinton. Yeah.
Obama knew the strength of a. So those people should know it as well, that the American people had turned on it, were not sold on these commitments. That was something that Democratic voters wanted. And then there was a faction of the Republican Party also that wanted that. Again, Ron Paul was very successful among young conservatives, particularly in some ways heralding the shift in the Republican Party from a neoconservative to a kind of more mixed and now to an outright kind of non-interventionist policy. I think this has been a tremendously good phenomenon, and this is the one way in which the Republican Party has become more like my views over time. In many other ways, it's moved away from my views. In this way, I think it's a good thing. But the comparable, because of the neat ideological sorting, the comparable anti-war effort or sentiment on the Democratic side really does seem to be losing at least political salience.
Well, so the point of this clip is to show that there are Democrats who are changing their mind because of the obvious the reality that there's no air for any of this on the left-hand side. And what I thought was interesting also about that clip, it's not that he just takes this position. He refers to Ukraine flag stands.
Ukraine stands.
Ukraine stands, which is,
Ukraine stands sounds like it's just a different country that we might invade for its oil or something.
No, the idea that, this kind of online perception of people who have Ukraine flags in their emojis being incredibly pro-war and hawkish, that kind of tacit acknowledgement says that he kind of understands what the broader zeitgeist is like in a way that is notable. And taking that kind of a dig at people who have oriented all of their politics around having the Ukraine flag and emoji, it felt to me that they kind of got it. And so I'm a little bit hopeful.
A zeitgeist that is just so misguided because the Ukrainian forces, you can set aside what would happen in an ideal world. Like I have no affection for the Putin regime. It's authoritarian and tyrannical. But we are not going to have Ukrainian forces overwhelm and defeat Putin and have some sweeping regime change. And the more we think that, the more we risk some sort of nuclear escalation. So there has to be. It is not actually a wildly far left or far right idea at all. It's not an extreme idea. It's now associated with these two positions. But the idea itself is not extreme. That we can continue to support Ukraine, but we've been doing that, and we have a right to say, look, enough is going to be enough, and we think you should really have negotiations. And we're not going to exclude Ukraine from those negotiations, but we have a right to say, no, we're not going to sit back patiently. To say
specifically that no negotiation should happen without Ukraine being at the table.
Well, former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard has weighed in on the CPC's about face while on Tucker Carlson tonight. Let's watch.
These so-called progressives did a very simple thing that apparently can appear to be brave in Washington these days. In that letter to President Biden, they just told the truth about how this ongoing proxy war with Russia is increasing in cost and consequences, both on the Ukrainian people, but also the American people here at home, and how it's negatively impacting gas prices, increasing inflation, and so on. These progressives in the letter, they didn't say stop sending aid to Ukraine now. All they said was, hey, President Biden, engage in diplomacy. And the response they got, of course, from the warmongers who control the Democrat Party in Washington was to immediately be smashed to pieces, so much so that these Democrat members of Congress cowered in the corner with fear and now have gone so far out of their way, apologizing profusely for having the audacity to call for diplomacy in this war that's putting us all at risk.
Exactly what happened. That's 100% perfect summation of what happened.
And I called it, I got to say. I said this on my podcast about Tulsi Gabbard. I said this in a radar about Tulsi Gabbard. I've been saying, if you don't want them to be able to make the point that she just made, you have to stand up and be better about it. Democrats haven't. I should say, though, that the Green Party, left groups who aren't associated with the Democratic Party have consistently and continue to be strongly in favor of peace movements, and have had a consistent record that I would argue is inclusive of Afghanistan and the Iraq War in a way that these newer Republican moments have not been. And this isn't Democrat versus Republican. This is me saying both of these parties are in the grips of militarism, and that people who are frustrated with both parties, or the Democrats, but also don't share politics with the Republicans, can find a lot of support in these other more truly progressive leftist parts of the internet and organizations.
Now the Libertarian Party has been more against.
Absolutely.
What the Republican. Some Republicans are getting on board with reconsidering our military, our hawkishness, our engagements, et cetera. This is what the Libertarian Party has been urging the Republicans to do forever.
Yeah,
there's a lot of third party common sense on foreign policy that was just totally absent from the bipartisan consensus for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
We'll have more Rising coming up next.